Jacqui and I have done a number of events together pretty recently, mostly in New York City, to do with our book. Her book is Fierce Love. My book is Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. I think, Jacqui, your title is easier to remember. I don't have to note yours next to me. I learned yours before I can remember mine. Lots of words in mine.
I like your title.
Yeah. Jacqui and I have both read each other's books. We are both, not just friends committed to each other, but have found a weird circumstance where our books very much mirror each other. It's as if the part 2 of my book is her book, or part 2 of her book is my book. And I would just say one thing and then ask Jacqui to talk a little bit, and then I'll say a few words and maybe we can open it for some questions. It seems to me that Jacqui and I are both on the same track. And that is, the way I would sum it up is, how do you define success? And both of us define success as the intensity of the giving and receiving of love, rather than in the commercial realm or the career realm or the money realm or the prestige or the power realm. And so that's all I'm going to say now, but that's where the books really intersect in many, many ways. And so, Jacqui, why don't you talk about your new book for a little bit here? It comes out on Tuesday this week. So we're right on the cusp of your book being launched everywhere. I hope people get it. And pre-sales are brisk on Amazon. So get in there and you'll get your book. By the way, I found something out about pre-sales on Amazon. If you order now pre-sales, you'll actually get the book on Tuesday. I didn't know that before, but you'll get it the day of. Whereas if you order the day it comes out, you get it the next day. But if you'd like it on Tuesday and be a first person to open that book up and give it a 5-star review, then you can order Jacqui's book, Fierce Love, now. Jacqui, tell us about your book.
Well, thank you, Frank. Frank is my big, best commercial giver of the book. I'm glad to spend some time with you today talking about family values. I was intrigued to say yes to this conversation. First of all, because I get to talk to you again, Frank. But also, I'm a big fan of Wild Goose. I'm a Wild Gooser, and Jeff's production. Really appreciate it all. And the topic is interesting. Let's talk about family values today in the context of all the stuff that's happening in our nation around, it feels like Fahrenheit 4,000, I don't know, but let's try to monitor what children learn in classrooms about history and race. Let's show our children our worst selves in some ways as we fight with each other in the public square. So I was trying to think about how to frame this Fierce Love book in 3 sections about raising kids, Frank. The book is my big sermon. Jeff, you've heard me say some of the things here different ways over the years, because I've just been so brokenhearted over time by the way good people of moral courage have devolved into battles and scrapping and toxic politics and enraged interactions. I think because we're hurting. I think because things are broken. These are what I call hot mess times. And I don't think we're being our best selves. And the kinds of things that would have been coping mechanisms for us. Let's show our children some love. Let's fall in love, have children, save the planet, be happy. I don't know. We're just not practicing our love muscle. So 3 things I would like to say and give space for Frank to talk about them after he says his things. I want to talk about loving yourself as the most important family value and one that is absolutely under-discussed, underappreciated. I want to talk about loving your neighbor, but in being particular about radical, extravagant, crazy kindness. I'm kind of thinking about the Good Samaritan story and what love means from our Christian text. And then finally, I want to talk about loving the world, and I want to cast that in learning how to see. So 3 things kind of quickly. Let's talk about loving the self first. Even though the psalmist says in Psalm 85, we're a little lower than angels, we're a little lower than God is what it actually says, a little lower than Elohim. Frank, people are so ickied out by we're kind of like God that they won't even stay with that real translation. God created us a little lower than Elohim and crowned us with honor and glory. Why? hearkening back to Genesis and this idea of us being set apart, as very good to partner with God in the creation of the world, in the healing of the world, in the tikkun olam, our Jewish friends would say, in the coming of the reign of God, we might say, on the way into Advent, right? Like, you have a job to do, humans, here it is. And God has given you glory and honor to do it. And you're to subdue or manage the earth. I'm going to translate. Instead, we've gotten to dominate. And I think we've gotten to dominate because we're misunderstanding that text and we're misunderstanding our job. So, love yourself because you're God's ambassador. You're God's envoy. You're God's dude, woman on the job. You're God's foreperson on the job of caring for the world. And that's such an important responsibility. The psalmist also says, I praise you because I am awesomely and wonderfully made, in Psalm 139. So I am, Frank, you are God's envoy, God's steward of the earth, who knew you before you were born, who knew you when you were knitted in your mother's womb, who loves you, knows you will never leave you. Nothing, as Paul says, separates you from God. That's another reason to love yourself. In the writings of 1 John, the Johannine community, 1 John 4 says, God is love. And whoever lives in love lives in God and God lives in them. Kind of trying to remind us of the tabernacling Hebrew people moving across the desert with God in a box, right? With God in a tabernacle, with God in a little pop-up tent, maybe, to say, God's not that far from us, God is here. And the psalmist says that God is never far away. And the First John writer says, not only that, but if you tabernacle in love, God tabernacles in you. So now, humans, we have God inside us, so close to us that God is inside us. It's almost blasphemous to not love ourselves, but we do not teach that to our little people. We don't mean not to teach it. We tell them that they're lovable. We tell them that they're wonderful, but we stack up, Frank, all the to-dos, all the must-haves, all of the trappings, all of the worthiness metrics that are not simply, kid, love yourself. And I want us to argue that maybe one of the most important things that we give our children in terms of our values is that they belong to God, they're never far from God, and God lives inside them when they love. And that means they are a spark of divine, and they are beloved, and so are they, the other people too. So I believe that love of self, Frank, is the beginning of love of neighbor, and that cultivating that in the children. How do you do that? Well, Mommy, I didn't do well on my scores. Okay, baby, let's talk about that. What happened? Process. Is that test score a measure of how lovable that child is? Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. So that's the kind of thing I think we need to do. 1, teach the children to love themselves. 2, radical, crazy, extravagant, rule-breaking kindness. As a family value. When things are stressful, Frank, when things are terrifying, we often circle up our wagons and get with our own kind. West Side Story, stick with your own kind, one of your own kind. And I think what I would be wishing for our faithful families to teach their children is that the world turns around in radical kindness, in revolutionary love, in fierce love. When I was a teen, right out of college, young woman, 22 years old, I had a really bad car accident. Frank, I tell that story. This really good Canadian woman kind of saves me, just shows up for me, buys me food, buys me a hotel. Like the Good Samaritan, tends to my wounds and takes care of me. I think parents are teaching their children to be kind, but I think there's a boundary that's being put also. Sort of be kind, but be nice, but a kind of pulling in to our own people, the feeling that out there is unsafe and in here is safe, and there's a border and we shouldn't cross it. I think, especially with all the racial dynamics in our nation, that's almost a natural response. But I'm wondering if parents could be cultivating kindness outside of the box, like outside of the box kindness. Encourage your child to adopt a family, to buy a cow on the Heifer Project. Encourage your child to read books that are not about their culture, to go to indigenous lands and study the history, the story there. The opposite of what's being said in the news about don't teach our children about race because it'll hurt their feelings. I'm saying the opposite of that I think it's revolutionary kindness to help children grow empathy for the other by sharing the other's business, sharing the other's story, sharing the other's perspective. Get your white child black dolls, get your boy child black dolls. Cool. But like shake it up a bit and expose children to other folks' worldviews as a kindness to those folks, but also as a kindness to your child who will be in a world that is incredibly multi-ethnic and multicultural, and they need to practice that kind of coping now. So 1, cultivating self-love. 2, cultivating radical kindness by the way you model to them, this is how mom and dad spend our money. This is where we consume our media. This is how we live in the world. This is Christmas presents, not so much, but investing in trees. Show them a radically kind faithfulness, and it will become, I think, a part of their adulthood. And lastly, Frank, because I want to toss this back to you, how do we teach our children to be world citizens? How do we invite them to have an imagination that the world is bigger than their backyard, their posse is larger than their grandparents? And I think it's something about learning how to see how much they are like the children in India or in Haiti or in Chicago or on the South Side. Our Beatitudes, our 10 Commandments, these are codes that are written for us that are easy to dive into with your kids' parents, but also, what kinds of books are you going to put on their shelves? What do you want them to listen to so that they grow a sort of muscle that says they're inextricably connected to all the children around the globe? Because not only are they national citizens, they live in a world that will never just be about the United States of America due to technology, due to the way we invest in other countries. So can we cultivate in them learning how to see? Rabbis do midrash on love your neighbor as yourself by saying, if your neighbor's donkey falls down and ends up in your yard, you have to feed the donkey, water the donkey, and help the donkey up. We don't have donkeys anymore. But if your neighbor's grandmother doesn't have healthcare, if your neighbor's son drops out of college and doesn't have a job, if your neighbor's water system is still wrecked, like the one in Detroit, these neighbors, no matter where they are inextricably connected to your little people. And I think we can grow that kind of empathy if we speak to them about learning how to see through the eyes of the other and learning how to see an inextricable connection to the whole world. That's my 3 points on family values found in Fierce Love.
Well, thank you, Jacqui. And, having shared the platform with you before, I always enjoy listening to you to the point where I sort of lose track of all my best laid plans of what I was going to do, because I get into what you're saying and it's kind of like, I'm listening to you. So let me just talk a little bit about a few thoughts that I have related to your book and my book and what we're doing here today. In terms of my own personal history, which is very different than Jacqui's, I come out of, as you all know, if you're part of the Wild Goose family, a background that is very much the opposite of where I'm at these days. Right-wing evangelical fundamentalist Christianity of the 70s and 80s that basically created what we now call the anti-abortion movement. That's my legacy with my father, Francis Schaeffer. The flip side of that is the little community I grew up in, L'Abri Fellowship in Switzerland, before Dad became world famous within the evangelical community. kind of like NASCAR. If you're into NASCAR, you know who the drivers are. If you're not, you don't know anything about it. Well, the evangelical bubble's like that, famous within that bubble. Before that all happened, the community of L'Abri Fellowship was very, very open, multicultural. We had African students from Africa coming and staying with us every year. They were at the University of Sofia in Bulgaria. About 20 of them would come every summer for the summer. Surprising that Switzerland is sort of an isolated, white, very provincial country in some ways. The business of Switzerland is Switzerland. They're not particularly friendly to outsiders. They don't want you there, really. But the L'Abri community mirrored my parents' decision to have an intentional community of open homes. And so, though the theology was fundamentalist and evangelical, it was very open and not just tolerant, but embracing of all kinds of people. So oddly enough, when I stepped over sleeping bags to get to the kitchen to get a drink of water at night, whatever it might be, it could be a drug addict from London who had heard about L'Abri and was crashing there for a weekend while he hitchhiked across Europe. A lesbian couple from Norway. It could be a couple of Black kids from Sofia, Bulgaria, who were from Kenya, and they came to L'Abri as a retreat for the summer. One of the reasons I left the evangelical community that I talk about in the foreword of my new book, Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy, and in my memoir, Like Crazy for God, and other books I've written about this passage, was that when my family and I as my dad's nepotistic sidekick, got into the big time of American Christianity, I should say American white Christianity principally, in the 70s and 80s, and we're playing stadiums with 25,000 people in Dallas, filling the Grand Ole Opry, filling Madison Square Garden, showing these film series that I had produced and directed, like How Should We Then Live, Whatever Happened to the Human Race. The kind of people I was encountering, for instance, Jerry Falwell, who lent me his jet to go on a speaking tour, Pat Robertson, Dr. Dobson, all these luminary evangelical pastor, leader, televangelist types were so uncharitable and such unkind people and such fraudulent folks in the way they dealt with people, raised money, and so forth, that what strikes some people that I talk to about getting out of this background as curious is that I left because they compared so badly to my parents' mission before they were famous. It kind of like some kid that grows up in a little country church somewhere in a small town with a very authentic parents running this little community. They're very open, they're very kind. And then for some reason, their father becomes the next big televangelist star. And they see a change. It was something like that. But the environment I fell into was about as far away from Jacqui's thesis in her book, Fierce Love, as you could get. It was about money, not about love. It was about grasping, not sharing. It was about turning every ministry into a monopolistic family hierarchical structure where the whole family gets folded in, everybody's on the paycheck, it's all in the perks and so forth. So I won't belabor that to a wild goose group, many of whom have former evangelical refugees in it, except to say that in my book, Fall in Love, what I'm trying to do is in a way talk about real family values as opposed to fake family values. And what we were pitching in the 70s was really just repackaged misogyny. Women had their role, men were supposed to be in charge, no to abortion, contraceptives, suspect of that. Childcare, women should stay home and not have careers. That's not what our whole project was about, but that was the milieu into which we contributed a huge impetus and stimulus, like an adrenaline shot. So I have a lot of regrets because I've been on both sides of these issues. I have been the bad guy. I am the repentant bad guy. And I've spent the last 35, 40 years on the other side of the issues from my fundamentalist background. But even so, one aspect of Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy is confessional. So it's not saying, look, we need to change our culture to be in favor of women. We need to change our culture to be in favor of children and families. We all need to be parents. I don't mean we all need to have children biologically, but we all have to parent each other the way Jacqui parents her church, or Jacqui's parenting me right now by sharing this platform with me so we can talk about each other's books. That's caregiving. That's a kind of a parenting. So in this book of mine, when I talk about fall in love, I'm talking about falling in love itself, literally falling in love with love. which is also Jacqui's message. And that is, do we care more about the giving and receiving of love and the caregiving we both give and receive than we do what we can get out of other people? When I talk about having children, I'm talking about looking at the entire world, whether you're pair bonded, single, non-binary, attached, gay, straight, female, male, any qualification you want to make. We all should have children. And that is, we should treat people around us as if we are in the parental role of non-negotiable caregiving. That's a whole different way of looking at the world than amassing billions of dollars so you can build your own rocket ship. A person who had that kind of money, who was thinking of the world in terms of these people working for me, I am going to treat as a parent, would not be paying minimum wage, but maximum wage. They would not be fighting them to unionize. They would be forming a union for their employees. They would not be quibbling over paid parental leave. They would insist on it for every young parent, male, female, non-binary alike. You've just had a child. We want you to go spend time with that child. We will pay you to do that. We will take care of everything. They would make a lot less money, and they would have undying loyalty and support from their company like never seen. Stay put. The average American moves 11 times, almost always to seek more money for a new job. Now, of course, we have to move around for a job if we don't have any work and we don't have the money. But the reason a lot of people move has nothing to do with need. It has to do with this idea that we're defined by our job title. So you're no better than your job title. So you're always trying to better yourself in terms of career, often at the expense of family. Save the planet. This is not a book on green energy, but the logic of this book, where we change our priority and definition of success. If our definition of success is doing, for instance, what I was doing today with my granddaughter, Nora, when there was a high tide in our little river inlet, and I put a kayak out there in the cold of November, and she was paddling around with a couple of field mice that she found in that kayak for a while. You know, if two lines had been forming, and one was a bunch of guys on jet skis out there, you know, who had flown in to have some extreme sport experience, and she's sitting there, you know, in a little kayak paddling around, these are two different images of how to use nature. If you extrapolate that out to the kind of people who care for the world around them, they're the people who have a vested interest because they are caring about the people around them, and therefore they consume the planet in a whole different way than being consumeristic. And then be happy really is the wrong term. I should say find joy. I think you find yourself happy or unhappy, but you can actually look for joy. And I think, again, if you define success as what you read in the eyes of those who know you best, who look to you for care, whether it's fear because you're going to discipline them, love, unconditional friendship, relaxed happiness, that's one kind of merit badge. If you're looking to people rather as a way to manipulate them, for career or for money, then this is not going to lead to your happiness. And of course, in my book, I have a lot of studies that show whether it's the loneliness that people are suffering from or the lack of fulfillment, all these things come back to one thing and one thing only. And this would be the key thing I'd like to wrap up and leave you with before we go back to Jacqui and questions. And that is, ask yourself, ask the culture, ask your school, church, nation, state, city, individuals, ask yourself this of your marriage or your children, or if you don't have children, how you regard other people. Just one single question. How do you define success? And if you apply that to every single relationship, including your, quote, life goals, you are asking the question that will eventually define who you are because you have a malleable brain. So if you define success as making the most money possible at the most prestigious job at every opportunity, you're going to wind up like I did with my children when I was a young, bad father and spend 6-7 months on the road questing for success in some chosen area. For me, it was the big time evangelical world, and then later the B-movie market trying to make ends meet, and realized too late that you wasted huge chunks of time chasing something you didn't really need to chase because your idea of success was wrong. But the same thing goes for relationships. As someone who comes out of a domineering, testosterone-driven background, as a male raised to be an asshole by divine right, because I was told my Reformed theology demanded that I be the, quote, head of the home, there's a lot of regret there. And you realize that the person who pays the biggest price for the wrong sense of success is you, is the individual. And having changed over the years, where I don't see my wife, Jeannie, of 52 years, as someone to dominate, boss around, and control, but rather as my friend and my partner, and in many cases, my counselor, it's a completely different thing. And so to me, when you change your idea of what success is and your formula becomes to look through Jacqui's lens, that success is measured, if you want to put it this way, by the fierceness of the love you experience from others and give to others. And that includes love of yourself that Jacqui was talking about. You're going to have one kind of set of goals and you will become one kind of person. If your version of success is shareholder profits and the bottom line and the GDP, you're going to have a completely different kind of striving life. So we all need jobs and we need careers. And I do childcare for 3 of my 5 grandchildren every day of the week and have for 12 years, 13 years now. So my daughter-in-law, Becky, can have a successful career. I believe in women's careers. I believe that family values are not cast in concrete, stuck somewhere in the 1940s or 50s. But when we talk about family values, I mean the real family values, which is to value other people around you, whether they're biologically related to you or not, to value them. And if you want to have a handbook on how to do that, I think Jacqui and I both approach this subject from slightly different points of view, but our 2 books actually fit together very well. And I'm really happy to have that weird coincidence. And the only other thing I'd say about Fall in Love, Have Children, Stay Put, Save the Planet is just a bizarre thing happened to me. And I think it's happened to Jacqui's book too. I've never asked Jacqui about this, so I'm going to end with this and throw it out to you, Jacqui, see what you think about this. I think that Mother Nature basically sent us a memo with the COVID pandemic. And basically it was this, okay, Frank Schaeffer's written this theoretical book on real family values, whether it's within pair bonded relationships or marriage or having children or no children, but parenting everybody around you, paid family leave, whatever, a legislative agenda. Jacqui's written this book on a sort of what if we had fierce love and treated people this way. COVID sent us all home and said, okay, now you're going to be stuck with each other and you're really going to have a moment of truth. You're going to figure out what's really important to you. So it's almost as if we have all been forced for a year or more with COVID to kind of try out Jacqui's method and try out my premise about where real happiness can be found. And we find a lot of people quitting their jobs and saying, no, we're not going back to normal. We find a lot of people like my son saying, renegotiating his contract, saying, I'm going to work from home for 4 days a week now, and I'm not coming back or I'm going to look for other work. We found a lot of young fathers in places like New York City wandering around with strollers saying, you know what, now that I'm into this childcare thing, I'm going to hang on to it. I've discovered something about myself I didn't know. Now, of course, there's a lot of other people fleeing and wanting to get back to wherever their office was and so forth. But there's a whole groundswell in the Great Resignation of people who are basically looking for what I think Jacqui's offering in her book and what I'm advocating in mine, and who are desperate to find this and who are literally quitting work and changing everything in their lives because COVID gave them a glimpse, not necessarily of the perfect way to do things, but there are other ways to do things. And I really want that to resonate. COVID has forced us to acknowledge there are other ways to look at capitalism. There are other ways to look at each other. There's other ways to look at our partner, our spouse, our child. And that's a huge kind of break with the past on a level of a world war or something. So leave you with that thought. And then Jacqui, back to you. And I think we also have some questions coming up here if you want to check any out that you might want to answer.
I think I just want to take a second to respond to this last thing you said, which is so important. And I was thinking, my husband's not listening, so I'm going to tell this story. We hunkered down during COVID. I wrote this book during COVID, as you wrote yours, and also post this fire that burned down our church in December. Finished it in February after the fire. And I got to say, just like they're saying, Frank, that the air cleared, people traveled less. And the air, I imagine one of these sci-fi movies you're watching, you say, oh my goodness, after that storm, it was clearer. And so the hunkering down together, our kids came to live with us for 3.5 months, including 2 little babies. One was 3 weeks old. It was just magical and hard and amazing and good and hard and good to put these two families together. But we did. And Ophelia, the toddler, had the run of the house. Whose meeting is she in today? It was magical to be close like that together in ways that we'll never get to do again. And in that time, John, who's nicer than I am, I will say, John and I had 0 squabbles in 18 months. Like I can't remember one. I remember us going on a walk in the cold and going, we've not squabbled. Wow, what is happening right here? So there was something very fierce about, can I just say, Frank, like fiercely being kind to each other. There were a couple of times when I think we all were like, this feels like a good time to go for a walk, or a good time to have coffee, or a good time to turn on the music so that whatever might be bubbling, tension, anxiety, because of course we're all afraid, just would dissipate, So that to me is resonating with what you're saying about just what are the choices we want to make. Now, here I am back in the world of crazy, back in the world of like the fire world is just, combusting in terms of decisions and all of that. And I had the first squabble with John in, 19, 20 months last night. And I think we only had the squabble because we were both back in the world. Back in the world. So how could we keep simulating? Right before we got back on the call here, I said to him, you're my most important thing, period. So how do I get myself back into that womb or that container of just the preciousness of this marriage versus the crazy of the world? The COVID taught us what was urgent. And my family is what's urgent. So I'm feeling a little bit out of whack, Frank. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. John and I spent every second together for 3 months on sabbatical this summer. And so what's a lesson for all of us, all the families, no matter what the configuration is, all the people who love some people, what is the lesson that COVID gave you about relating to each other, and how do we get back to it, even as the world, quote, opens up? Is my long comment to what you said.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's odd you bring that up now, because I've had a similar experience with Jeannie recently, in the sense that, this is going to sound insane because we've had 2 close people that we love die with COVID. It's a tragedy and so forth and so on. But there are days now with the kids heading back to school when they sort of camped out with us for 7, 8 months. When life starts picking up and I see Nora at school pick up and bring her back here, or Jeannie and I are together, where I miss the intensity, or at least the purity of the experience of, look, the only thing going on here is being together. Yeah. Yes. And I miss that. And recently I don't want to digress here, but share something with you. About 2 weeks ago, Jeannie had a mild heart attack. And so she's fine. And I spent 3 days sitting next to her in Beverly Hospital, and for 12 hours a day or more, kind of being her nurse and caregiver there, with very good medical staff. But of course, I was with her. She had a surgical procedure and had a stent put in, and she's home and she's fine. And I had an interesting experience with her that really relates something to your book, Jacqui, very directly, in that when she was coming out of surgery, I was walking along next to her, holding her hand, being wheeled back up to the cardiac intensive care unit. And she was coming out of anesthesia and talking to me. And I said, were you scared going in? And she said, yeah, when they were anesthetizing me, as they started giving me the various medications, I felt myself getting sleepy. For a minute, I was quite nervous. And then she said, another thought crashed into my brain. I was just lying there thinking about what a wonderful life I've had and feeling grateful. Now, there's 2 ways to take that, that only I know the inside story of. The first is, what a wonderful thing to be partnered and married to someone who has that very authentic feeling of gratitude at a time of supreme crisis, because who knows how this will all go. Right. So that tells you everything you need to know about Jeannie. But there's a second thing. the folks who have joined us here in this Wild Goose event, and you, Jacqui, what you don't understand is that the first years of our marriage, me being a teen father, dragging her into this big time evangelical world when she'd come from what I'll call a normal family in San Francisco of sort of left-wing nominal Roman Catholics and so forth. Nobody except Jeannie on this earth and me, and I probably blocked out more, knows what crap I put her through. Yeah. So what was implied in what she was telling me and the way I took it was more than her just saying, I've had a wonderful life and I felt so grateful, which is a lovely sentiment. There was an unspoken line there, and that is, I forgive you. Because her last thought was not thinking about what an asshole I have been, particularly in the early stages of our 52 years together, what a difficult son of a bitch once in a while back then, and not so much now for the last years. But, a guy groomed from birth to be this evangelical, bumptious guy, thinking he's in charge of everything and so forth. She was telling the one person she had a wonderful life who basically says to himself, this is incredible because it means that she is looking at life as a whole cloth in which I have really found redemption, me personally, Frank Schaeffer, in that she sees this guy walking next to her the way I wish other people could see me, but I can never really see myself. Mm-hmm. And it gets back to what you say in your book. And that is, for me to receive that from her, I really have to work on that area, Jacqui, that you talk about in terms of loving yourself, right. because that's a very real thing to me. This is not theory, what Jacqui's talking about. It's really important stuff.
It's really important, yeah.
Yeah, and I found it so important in terms of the relationship I have with Jeannie. This is far more personal than I thought this was going to get, but I'm just sharing that with you.
I'm so glad Jeannie's okay, Frank. Thanks be to God. That's great.
Yes, thanks be to God.
I'm sorry that she went through that, but I'm also
yes. Okay. Yeah, and again, I've enjoyed nursing her, in this caregiving role. And in a sense now she's back up and going for her walks and everything's back to normal. But, taking care of her and bringing her things and cooking, bringing things in bed and taking care of her, making sure she's doing her medication and blood thinners and all the rest of it. Right. It's not a burden. I mean, for someone who understands they owe the person they're with a lot more than they owe them is my perspective on it. Yeah. Any opportunity to do anything a little out of the ordinary and say, look, not only am I here for you, here I am. Everything is stopped now. I'm just sitting here with you. I mean, these are the kind of things that you can't get to unless you go through that passage somehow. And I just think your book has so much about that passage towards this unconditional giving and receiving of love. And the point you make, Jacqui, that's so good, it's not only giving, it's the openness to receiving love.
Yeah, absolutely. And the gift that is to the other,
yeah.
to let you love them.
Yeah.
I want to answer this question that Scott Smith put in the chat. Is that okay, y'all? And then it feels to me, Frank, that white evangelical one, you could take that, but I got thoughts. But Scott, your question is let me just read it because sometimes chats are hard to read. How do we know when extravagant love becomes manipulative gifts that imply invisible ties that are created by these actions? That's a great question, Scott. And I would say my very first response would be, you don't. You really can't know fully the intention of the other. You can know your own. So let me just talk about this first, the other part. We don't know what someone intends to you. They might be trying to manipulate you with their extravagant love, right? They might be trying to buy you with their extravagant love. But the kind of love I'm talking about isn't, just about hearts and chocolates. It might be. I like chocolate, especially with almonds, if anyone's listening, chocolate covered almonds. But you won't know the intention of the other. So this is where when Frank is saying, this idea of loving yourself fiercely. I found this poet named Rudy Francisco. Yeah, I love this poem. He says, this is the whole poem. Perhaps we should love ourselves so fiercely that when others see us, they know exactly how it should be done. So really sourcing this whole enterprise with self-love. Again, self-love born of the fact that God is in you, because that's what the Bible says, that you are created in the image of God, awesomely and wonderfully made. And if you're not a person who does Bible, truly, the miracle of being a human being that breathes and eats and walks in the world, that's miraculous, and you're fabulous. You're knowing that, you loving yourself, appreciating yourself with an unconditional regard, right? A non-possessive delight. You have less vulnerability to being manipulated because you know your value and you know your worth. That's you. You know that. You still won't know their intention, but you'll know your own boundaries, right? On the other hand, I think about Frank, people, did I spoil the child? I picked her up all the time. Like, can you love somebody too extravagantly? I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think we who are the lovers, like, what wouldn't you do? You know, I was salty last night with John. I'm going to say if it was someone's fault, it wasn't mine. I was salty. But today, my job for my beloved is to pursue him. Because I already said I was sad. I can't have him moving in the world, not feeling my giant, extravagant love for him. I'm never going to wait to call a friend. Like, I'm not going to be the second last coming to the table with love, because life is short and you're going to die. So I think it's our job, loving without expectations, loving without attachments, loving for the sake of loving, not because of what's going to get. I'm going to argue it's not love if it's attached to expectations. But I think the love is just the unconditional outpouring of this agape, this affection, this well-being, non-possessive delight in the unique particularity of the other, my Professor Jim Loder said. So friends, that's the kind of love I'm talking about. Yes, go ahead and buy some hearts of chocolate. But I'm really talking about, I see you and I feel you and I want you well. And I will invest in that. And that kind of love, I think, can't really be measured, but it can be described as fierce or extravagant. What do you think, Frank? Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much so. I like that. Yeah. And you had mentioned an earlier question about, can you speak to the attitude that Marjorie, of the white evangelicals, that they are the only ones with morals and ethics? I want to go beyond that, actually, and talk about something that I do have in my book. And this is not a plug. It's a good answer to this question. I would have gone there 5-6 years ago before I started to write this, but I really changed my view of the very word morals and morality. You know, when I was writing this book about caring for these three of my five grandchildren, the three youngest ones, my son, John, who lives across the street, these are his three kids. They're 13, 11, and 7 now. I began to do a lot of reading because I have a bunch of friends who started reading this manuscript who teach science and who were saying, look, there's something really good here, but you can flesh this out with more information on how and why we love. Because, and this applies to Jacqui's book too, you know, love is not a feeling. Love is an actual quantifiable thing. You can look at a dog's brain and see that it's having the same emotional reaction to human bonding as we do. Even an animal that co-evolves with us was so impacted by the human ability to love that dogs, by the way, I know this sounds like I'm going off topic, but I'm not. Dogs actually share certain human cancers. That's how close we evolved. And in dogs' ability to bond and be loyal, we see a lot of what they've pulled back from the humans and what we pulled from these wolf packs that we brought into our lives. And I actually have a section on that. But when you look at the anatomy of love, if you like, you find some extraordinary things. For instance, that gay adoptive parents, men who adopt a child, even if the child is adopted somewhat later in life, bond with that child in a measurable way with hormonal samples taken from their saliva and blood, brain scans, oxytocin levels as breastfeeding new mothers. Wow. So, and I have the study in my book, and this isn't some peripheral thing from the Daily Mail. This is a study that with a lot of fail-safes and other universities. The researchers that I quote in my book were actually doing this as a control. They were doing a study of young mothers, females who have had babies early in the process. And to do a control, like a fail-safe kind of placebo effect, they started studying males in relationships as well, fully expecting they would find a vast difference with the females. They didn't. And what they found was exactly the same, not to the point that it was interchangeable, to the point that unless they had put the gender of the person they were studying on the result, they wouldn't have known the difference. And I think that's pretty stunning when you think that we have that power to bond. So when we talk about evangelical attitudes about morals, what I have to say, it will surprise some people, and that is morals do not come from sages like Jesus, Martin Luther King Jr., or Muhammad, whomever. Morals are evolved in us. We have a core, and that core has nothing to do with right or wrong as we use these words in a judgmental sense of it's wrong or it's right. They have to do with survival. And the whole new study in evolution now that has gone in a completely different direction than sort of a misinterpretation of Darwin is that it never was the survival of the fittest. It's always been about the survival of the friendliest. In other words, species, including trees that feed each other through their root systems, or wolf packs that take care of each other, or humans that pair bond, but then also wind up taking care of adoptive children with the same intensity as the biological parent. That caregiving, the survival of the friendliest, the ability to have community and the ability to caregive is actually the only reason Jacqui and I are here talking today, or any of you who are participating are online with us, because we never would have existed. Mm-hmm. In other words, in all of our individual histories, yes, there are wars and rapes and pillage and people left by the roadside, but there's a vast majority of people, which, by the way, is one reason I'm an optimist about the future of the human race, who did give care, or Jacqui wouldn't be here. I wouldn't either, because somewhere down that ancestral trail, somebody fed a hungry child. Yeah. Somebody took care of a woman who was running for her life and took them into the hut or the cave and protected her from whoever was chasing her, be that a beast or a human. So what I want to say is Jacqui's book and my book are not a call to be moral, better people Jesus will love more. From my point of view in my book, and I have the research to back it up, it is a call to actually fit in with the evolutionary prime directive, which is care and give care. And it's one shared by all of nature. Root systems of trees feed each other. We take care of each other. We don't have a survival of the fittest evolutionary path. We have a caregiving path. And even the evolution of human birth came out that way, because babies' heads are only a third, the brain is only a third the size it's going to be in adulthood when a baby's born, unlike other primates, which means childhoods are by necessity long, which means, of course, it always takes a village, because there's no mother on earth who's ever been able to raise a child alone. Just like there's no male parent that's ever been able to do it alone. It's all community, and always has been, or none of us would be here. So I just want to add that Jacqui's book, her claim for fierce love, and my book talking about real family values, these are not Oprah-esque options on people who want to behave nicely to each other. This is not optional. And the proof of that is when you abandon this, we pay such a huge price of depression, suicide, loneliness, and the rest of it. It's because your entire evolutionary core being comes up and screams for what you're missing. It's not optional. And this is science-based. This is not greeting card stuff. This is hard-edged, real stuff. I just want to add that. So when it comes to this evangelical idea that they're more moral, they're not departing from some moral code that the rest of us hold. They're departing from the evolutionary structure of who we all are, which is not to stand in judgment of other people, but to reach out and care for them. That's the natural thing to do. That's right. That's what nature tells you to do. And then when Jesus comes along and puts it into words, the reason it resonates is that's who we evolved to be. Now, you can have a Christian come in and say, well, that's who God created you to be. Fine, I'll buy that. That's a fine explanation. I happen to think it's evolution. That's not the point. The point is, who are we? Yeah. We are love addicts. That's all humans are. We are love addicts, and we function totally on the basis of caregiving. And if we stop being in that loop, we really pay a mental, physical price.
I really love that, Frank. And I want to add to what Frank is saying. This also what this kind of caregiving looks like. That I mean by fierce. What is fierce about it also is that we have insisted, we have demanded, we have confronted the wild beast chasing the woman, we have confronted the broken system harming the child we have confronted legislation and laws that dismember families. So it's also not Oprah-esque around like it's mammy pammy and squishy and codependent. This kind of love is fierce in that it has learned how to survive by also confronting boldly, confronting what's broken in a bold way. And I'm just a witness. I'm just a testimony to say, my mom and dad loved us with like both, love that is sweet as molasses and also with tempers that could be briny, like the fat back in the collard greens type thing, but what they taught us as children is to kind of fight for what's good and to fight for what's right. And I think talk of love sometimes wants to act like there's not a fight in it. There's a fight in it. When Frank is nursing Jeannie, there's a fight in it. When, there's a fight for her wellness with his time and his care and his container. There's a fight for my mom's, survival with stage 4 lung cancer in my dad, right? He fought for her to live until she died. And I'm going to say, friends, whether we're Christian, Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, atheist, humanist, who cares? Human beings, I think we might also be called to fight inside love for what's good. So when you listen to me and Frank answer this question about the white evangelicals, it's not just the white evangelicals, it's anybody trafficking in hate. Manchin, anybody. Whoever doesn't have the greater good of love for humankind at the core of their work needs a fight from us, a confrontation from those of us who understand that that's what's moral. That to me is what's moral, is not who was bad and who said a bad word or who slept with somebody, I don't know. What's moral is the vision of the holy for a healed world, for us all to see it together, work toward it together, and to tussle with each other when it doesn't happen. Vote the people out who don't get it. Demand restitution and reparations for those who wound and maim. We cannot stand by and watch people, wound the world with their toxicity. So if you've got a moral outrage cooking in you for your white evangelical uncle on the way to Thanksgiving, come to Middle Church for some resources about how to have that talk. You don't have to beat them up. You don't have to curse them out. In fact, please don't. But you could say in a kind of bold way, I'm not with your hatred. I'm not. And see what happens. So I don't want us to be tepid.
Yeah, and just building on that, I mean, you have sort of down-to-earth examples right in our face right now, actually, that have a lot to do with an agenda that I spell out very clearly in my book in terms of what needs to be done for real family values to happen. Let's just take one, and I'll play this out a little bit rather than a whole list. But let's talk about paternity and maternity leave,
right?
Paid leave. This has not been included in the current bill. And okay, that's fine, but it has to happen. It doesn't have to happen because we've got some social agenda where we want to be like Scandinavia.
Right.
It has to happen because I know women in low-paid jobs who had to go back to work while they're still bleeding from giving birth 3 days before.
Right.
And they don't have the ability to stay home with that child even for a week.
Right.
I know men who make a lot of money who feel that they will lose their job and not get promoted if they take the paternity leave that is offered by their swanky company. Right. Because the culture tells them that they should put their job first. So let's just take that one example of something to fight for. Why would you fight for this? Because of a social vision of socialism or the Democratic Party or the Republicans or whatever? No. You do this for the same reason that if you see someone step off the curb and there's oncoming traffic and you've never met them before, you reach out and you take their arm and pull them back. And we've all had that happen in cities when someone steps forward or they take a stumble on a staircase for a subway. You've done this. Everybody listening to this has found something like that, a child running out.
Right.
The idea that I'm in a community that there's already big income disparity, but that I'm in a community that has to question the fact that a female of my species who's just given birth or had a C-section and hasn't even had the stitches out yet has got to go back into the workplace because there is no provision from her company or the state to help her.
Right.
This has nothing to do with politics. I'm talking, this is barbarism.
Yes.
It's
That's right.
disgusting. And we need to get angry about stuff like this, and we need to push
That's
for the
right.
legislation and vote for people. We really, really, really need to shake the dust off our sandals, to put it in the biblical terms,
No, that's right.
to a society that doesn't just stand up. Let's just take that one thing. Okay, there's one thing we could all be fighting for if we care
Right.
about looking through Jacqui's lens or my lens or anybody's lens. That's the deal. And we have so many things like that in our culture where it has nothing to do with socialism. It has to do with just human decency, basic decency, basic decency.
That's right. I agree.
That's it. So,
And-
we need basic decency.
And we need to then, Frank, and I'm just going to say some things that my son would tell me. When I'm shaking my dust off, when I'm going to live my values I'm going to live through fierce love. I'm going to live, you guys get the book. Ubuntu is this philosophy I talk about. I am who I am because Frank is who he is. Frank's children's welfare is my children's welfare because we're inextricably connected. Cool.
Yeah.
Then we pick the thing. You pick your thing. And let's say it's paid leave. Then you don't do anything else in your life that goes against that value. That's what fierce love looks like. I saw somebody wrote in the chat, how to begin action. Well, we stop shopping at places. We could stop shopping at some of the places where that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Just make a list, just don't do it. We could decide to spend our money in a different way. We could decide to lift up that value in the social media, in the way we talk about things. We could decide that our thing is to make sure that every child has a healthy start, because every child has parents at home for the first 6 months, 2 months, first 6 months, 2 months, whatever it is. So I'm just saying we get to put our money, our time, our energy, our activism where our love is. And that's what will make the world a revolution and save the planet, Frank, and make us happy.
That's
blessed, joyful.
Yeah. I just mentioned that, again, that Jacqui's book goes on sale Tuesday. You can pre-order now, and you will have your book Tuesday. If you do, I would urge you to pre-order Jacqui's book, Fierce Love. It's a great book. My book beat you out of the gate by a week, I think.
And Frank's
and it's already out there. So, why don't you order them both together and get two nice books? I promise you this is good seasonal reading. If we're going to head into the holiday season and you want something meaningful, read Jacqui's book.
Read Frank's book. Read both books. Buy a copy each, and maybe one for your friends.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, that'd be good.
and if Jacqui and I write, gargantuan bestsellers, we'll pay for our groceries, but neither of us will build a rocket ship, because authors just don't do that kind of thing much.
Well, and also, good God Almighty, if you have money enough to build a rocket ship, let's end hunger. Let's end hunger for the world's children, for the nation's children. We could just do it so quickly.
Yeah.
Anyway, y'all, was it good? Are you happy you came?
I think I was happy I was here, Jacqui.
I was happy I was here too.
Talk.
Yeah. Thank you, Frank. I love having. So we've got a bunch of stuff going on this week, y'all. I think our hosts are going to put in the world of this recording the ways you can keep connecting to Frank and me. We'd love to be in touch. We are Wild Goose Ears, aren't we, Frank?
We are. And thank you to the Wild Goose Festival. I went to the first one. I've been to them all except the COVID canceled year and the year before that, which I couldn't get to, but I've been to all the other ones. And Wild Goose is where I do family and church combined. It is my spiritual refuge. And I'm so grateful to anybody out here who supports Wild Goose and has been there. Thank you, Randy and Rick. And thank you, Jeff Clark, so much for hosting this.
Jeff. Absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you, producers. Rick, Gregory.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.